Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Ethics Virtual Town Hall Part 2. Our first session we had back in around the summertime, and we talked about ethics mostly on the county and city level here in Chicago, but we're so excited to have, first of all, our co-sponsors, Elisa Kaplan of Reform for Illinois and Clem Balanoff from Our Revolution, Illinois. Thank you for joining us tonight. Reform for Illinois was founded in 1997 by former Senator Paul Simon and Lieutenant Governor Bob Kustra to facilitate bipartisan cooperation on government reform issues. For more than 20 years, RFI has used research and advocacy to empower the public to participate in government, address the role of money in politics, and promote integrity, accountability, and transparency in Illinois' political system. Our Revolution, Illinois is one of the largest grassroots progressive organizations, say that 3 times, in the state, and is also the statewide chapter of the national organization, Our Revolution. They are committed to continuing the fight for progressive change here in our home state of Illinois. So welcoming them today to the Good Government Illinois Ethics Part 2 Virtual Town Hall. As I admit more people, I'm Maggie O'Keefe with Good Government Illinois, and I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. So everyone is probably used to the Zoom rooms. You all are automatically muted to minimize background noise. At the bottom left of your screen, you can turn on or off your video, your choice, your preference. And at the bottom center of your screen is the chat box. You can use that to ask questions during the town hall. We have a lot of questions to get to tonight from everyone that submitted. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to do our best to keep best in the limited time available to answer them all. And finally, if your internet connection gets interrupted and you drop off the Zoom, just click on the link again and you'll get you right back in. So the hashtag for tonight's virtual town hall is hashtag GoodGovIL. I encourage you to take screenshots, flattering ones only, please, of our guests and share your experience on your social media channels. You can find us on Twitter at GoodGovIllinois and on Facebook at facebook.com/GoodGovernmentIllinois. Make sure you're signed up finally on our email list to hear about future events. You can do that on our website, goodgovernmentillinois.com, for everybody that's watching on Facebook Live. We're doing this new this time in the new year. So please allow me to introduce Good Government Illinois' David Orr. You may know David as our longtime Cook County Clerk, 49th Ward Alderman, and the Vice Mayor to the late Harold Washington. But you may not be privy to David's role in various ethic legislations over the years. But lucky for you, I do. David was the chief sponsor of the first major ethics legislation signed by Mayor Washington in 1987. When he moved to the county, he was instrumental in passing similar laws in the early 90s. He's also traveled the state and got the legislature to pass a law to stop midnight pay raises. That's where counties and cities were passing pay raises after they were elected, but before they were sworn in. So Orr's law required all jurisdictions in the state to not only approve pay raises for polls at least 6 months before the election. So I am happy now to turn it over to our ethics reformer-in-chief himself, David Orr.
Thank you, Maggie O'Keefe. Welcome guests, welcome everyone. And that last note about pay raises, anybody who gets involved in ethics legislation, I think the 3 of you know, is not often very popular with their colleagues. So what we're trying to do tonight is take something extremely important like ethics legislation, accountability in government, and try and make it interesting. And I know that's a challenge. It's kind of easy if you just talk about Commonwealth Edison or Ed Burke or other things, but to really get to the nuts and bolts of ethics legislation, because it's not easy to write, to pass, or to enforce meaningful ethics legislation. And remember, when we talk about it, it's not just for the elected officials. We're probably focusing more on it tonight. It's really for all those people within government, probably over 100,000 of them just in Chicago area alone that are affected by various ethics laws. And so before we get too cynical about their value, keep in mind that those 100-some thousand people, the city, county, a certain degree to the state, school board, et cetera, they can't take gifts like they used to. There's laws preventing sexual harassment on the job and any kind of discrimination against LGBT, racist behavior, those kinds of things. Doesn't make everything perfect. It just gives the ammunition to those officers that want to be good about it. And in some cases, it gives power to prosecutors to go after people that do certain things. In fact, many of these laws, including what's called the SEI, Statement of Economic Interest, which is a state law that many people have to fill out forms for, even though they're weak, that's led to several indictments of people who have not done that. So it's a valuable commodity for prosecutors who might catch people who refuse to follow those rules. So our three very talented guests tonight I'm going to give them brief introductions, okay, because we have a fuller bio on the screen that you can all see. So first of all, Michele Smith, serving her third term in the 43rd Ward along the lakefront. Michele was University of Chicago Law School person who then went off to the U.S. Attorney's Office, where she did a lot of prosecutorial work. She's been a strong advocate of ethics, very much involved in ethics legislation that she and other council members and the mayor passed through Chicago City Council. Senator Elgie Sims, who's representative from the 17th District. That's largely south side of Chicago and some of the south suburbs. Most recently, he's been in the news a lot because he was the key behind criminal justice reform. We could do a whole program on that, and that's really big news in the state of Illinois. Besides that, his other focuses in recent years have been on equity in public education, on job development, on various police accountability measures. And then finally, but not least, our neighbor for some of us up here, Commissioner Larry Sufferden, who is both a county commissioner and a forest preserve commissioner. If you didn't know that, they serve in both functions. He's also chairman of a very, very important committee, and that is the Legislation and Intergovernmental Relations Committee. He's also the go-to guy for anything that's particularly complicated in the county. Everybody tends to go to Larry to try and clarify very complicated things. So all of these people, I thank you. You're all serious, you're hardworking, you're committed, and you're smart. So having said that, let's go. And to our friends who listened, we're going to try and weave in your questions. You sent questions. Some of them are a little out of the purview. If we can get to them, we will, but we're trying to weave them in some ways. So let's start with one of the key issues. And I'll let you all elaborate a little bit more, but we're going to keep it kind of like a talk show, I guess. What are your jurisdictions doing, okay, to prevent the key part of, conflicts of interest? And we're talking most about elected officials, but it's others as well, particularly related to outside income and lobbying. Let's start with that big one. I don't know if there's as much, frankly, in the state. I know there's stuff there's stuff in both the city and county, and there's more stuff being proposed for the county. Did you want to start with that, Michele, because you were part of some of the activities there?
I'm really pleased to. First of all, thank you so much for having this webinar, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. I see some folks I know and folks I don't, and this is a really, really important issue among all the incredibly important issues that are facing our state and our city. So we really faced an historic opportunity with the Lightfoot administration to make some dramatic changes very quickly. And I was very honored. I'm the first ever head of the Ethics and Government Oversight Committee in City Council. So a few of the things that we've done right away after years of effort, I suppose, like all good laws, is first of all, we completely empowered our Inspector General, something that I and several others have been working on 9 years, to give the Inspector General jurisdiction over all of us, which really has resulted in nothing but really good relations with the Inspector General, a lot of great tools for aldermen, a lot of good advice. And we really think that this is a very, very important issue. We also did a lot on outside income and primarily on the issue of cross lobbying. we passed a very broad bill prohibiting cross lobbying, which, speaking plainly, this whole issue of when people from one form of government lobby someone in another form of government, particularly when they have property tax appeals practices, is a real problem. And also things like red light cameras, the things that you read about in the news. So fortunately, based on that concern, we passed a very broad ordinance that specifically prohibits people from having outside income that puts them in a conflict of interest with their fiduciary duty as a representative of the city, governing, being worried about the city's income. And it's that ordinance that banned property tax attorneys from being able to practice property tax work. It's prohibited. Right now, there's a case in our Board of Ethics about a criminal defense attorney. And, we were not entirely definitive about what exactly you couldn't do. And the Board of Ethics has now interpreted that to mean that a criminal defense attorney can't be a criminal defense attorney. And I'm sure that's going to go up to the courts. But that has really been a very, very significant factor. And then we also passed a bill prohibiting lobbying of other jurisdictions. And there was an attempt to beat that back this year, and we succeeded as a council in refusing that. So I'm very, very proud of those achievements, and I hope my colleagues look at this in other jurisdictions. I will say that one area where we are not at the same level as the state and the county, I believe, is in the area of nonprofit lobbyists. We tried to pass a sweeping nonprofit lobbyist bill, and I think we kind of mucked it up, and it still hasn't gone into effect. And on Wednesday, we're going to introduce a substitute to try to solve some of the problems. So I know that in Springfield, nonprofit lobbying has been regulated for a long time. I'm not sure about Cook County, Larry, you'll have to tell us, but it's a process, it's an iterative process. So those are some of the main things that we've done. I can talk about other things as well, but that's the main things. We're very happy with it.
Okay, thank you. Elgie, Larry, you want to pick it up at all?
Sure, I'll go. First, David, thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody for being here for this very important topic. I think oftentimes folks look at ethics or in ethics discussions not as kind of, and they look at them as kind of wonky discussions. When in reality, it's about trust in government. It's about trust in and having faith in the government that we all have. And faith in our elected officials that the behavior that they're engaging in is in the best interest of the communities that they serve, not in their own self-interest. And I think that's the critical point of the discussions of ethics. As I was listening to the Alderman, I was thinking through a number of the changes that have happened in the city of Chicago, but also the items that we are looking at at the state level. We passed in the last General Assembly the Joint Commission on Ethics and Legislative Ethics Reform, and it was the commission got sidetracked by COVID, just as many things did. We had a number of legislative measures that we were looking to take up that got sidetracked. What I have always said in terms of reform discussions, they're journeys, not destinations. We have to continue to talk about what the items that we're going to improve, because at the end, the goal of reform discussion is to have a better product, a better government on the other side of it. So we've been looking at how we bring standardization across ethics legislation at all jurisdictions. So whether that's at county levels, what we found, the benefit of having that commission was we got to look at a number of these items. And what we found was, for the city and the county, there are registrations and there are active lobbying registrations, but there are other jurisdictions that have lobbying going on, but there is no regulation of that behavior. So we're trying to make, that's why we're trying to do the standardization of lobbying or lobbying laws at the state level, so that we could provide and put together a more standardized program for looking at and having the public understand who and what decisions are being made and how they're being made. Also looking at how individuals are registered. And so at the state level, the Illinois Secretary of State registers all lobbyists. So an individual who registers, and they have to identify themselves and any entities for which they work for, and all of that's searchable on the Secretary of State's website. But again, for the other 101 counties across the state, need to make sure that how that what's going on in those other entities. For instance, there was in DuPage County, less than 20. I think there were less than 200 lobbying registrations that have gone on. But to think that no one is engaged in lobbying in DuPage County or in Lake County, that's unrealistic. So to be able to standardize those activities at the state level is going to be critical. But also we require at the state level, and David, you mentioned this in your opening about the statements of economic interest. Now, that is, in my opinion, an area where we can do significant work to modernize that and give the ability for the public to really understand where income is coming from. I often say to people that we have a citizen legislature, and the reason why we have a citizen legislature is because you bring those experiences to your elected position, and you use those real world experiences to help make the bodies that we represent better. But those real world experiences, they should not be an avenue or springboard for you to enrich yourself. It should be an avenue for you to improve the quality of the community that you serve. And that's why we are trying to make sure that we shine light on the peddling of influence and how we understand how decisions are being made and who's making those decisions. Again, tracking political donations. That's critical. We want individuals to understand that their government is operating in their best interest. But that's why these discussions are always evolving. We're going to continue to make sure that we are doing the things necessary to shine light on the behavior and the actions that are going on, and also making sure that information is available to the general public so they can make a decision about what's going on. And let me also say this. I've served I've been in the General Assembly since 2012, and I know, and I've served with a number of individuals. I know the majority of individuals, the vast majority, good, hard-working individuals who only want to do right by their communities. Are there bad apples? Absolutely. Are there bad apples who work in corporate America? Absolutely. Are there bad actors who serve in not-for-profits? Absolutely. But what is critical for us is making sure that we make those decisions that let the general public know that their government serves them. And that's what the discussion of ethics is all about. So I'm looking forward to having a really good conversation this evening. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thanks, Elgie. Now, Larry, he's leading the charge at the moment on some major county legislation. Do you want to tell us about that, Larry?
Sure. First of all, David, thanks for inviting me to join in this. I want to just point out, by the way, that the first ethics issues that were decided by this country were in the United States Constitution. And most of us didn't know about this clause until Donald Trump, but the emolument clause, where we were trying to keep our officials from having ways of enhancing their wealth. I always say that the county is self-government. Nobody is really sure what it is we do. We don't provide a lot of direct services. We have courts, we have jails, we have a lot of money that we spend. If we were a state in the union, we would be the 19th largest state in the union. And so all the issues that are in any government, we have at the county. And I think, David, when you were there, we did a total rewrite of the Lobbyist Act. And I think that our current program has more disclosure and more information than any of the other governments in Illinois. We're going to work to redo some of these sections. I've got a proposal which I introduced in September It's basically work that I had done with Professor Sorensen and Ms. Daly and the members of the board, our current Board of Ethics and our prior Board of Ethics. And we've held up on doing anything with it because we wanted to see what Springfield was going to do. Since we're a subservient government to the state, it's important for us to understand what the state's going to do as they looked at trying to get a uniform lobbying laws and I think a statement of economic interest. As many of you may know, the county has a separate statement of economic interest, which is used as a trick question to disqualify people from the ballot. Over the last 20 years that I've been in office, we took the state form that is available from the State Board of Elections and it was the wrong economic interest, even though the state form actually is more comprehensive, and they were disqualified as candidates because they didn't have a statement of economic interest. So what we're looking to do right now is figure out.
Uh-oh, Larry, I think we might have lost you.
We
Oh,
lost Larry.
he'll come back. He'll come back.
Larry, where'd you go? Okay, Larry was about to tell us exactly where they are. He raised several things, and of course, Larry can be helpful in understanding one of the challenges that Michele, you've had, and Elgie have. When it comes to outside income, as you say, most technically are part-timers, okay, in office, even if they might big salaries. So most places are not saying you don't have the right, you have the right to make outside income. But the key is you have a, first of all, fiduciary responsibility to city, county, state. And therefore, what they're trying to prevent is, let me take a gross thing. Okay, we all would agree that if you're a powerful US senator and you're in a hearing and you find out about something that might shape the markets the next day and you sell off a lot of stuff, that stinks, right? In the same way that an insider information could lead to all sorts of things that it has historically, let's say in the city of Chicago. So that's what we want to prevent. No one ever said I couldn't teach for outside income, but the real powerful questions more have to do with how do we stop people from, I just go back an example for Ed Burke, okay? Ed Burke represented American Airlines, and I could go on to 50 major corporations, including Trump Tower. Well, the fiduciary responsibility in this case is to protect the taxpayers of the city of Chicago. So if your client is Trump Tower and their goal, right, is to save as much as they can on their property taxes, then you're hiring Burke's law firm because you want to take more money out of the city of Chicago taxpayers. And that's what I think we'd consider kind of a fiduciary responsibility. I'll take it back to you guys while we wait for Larry to get back on. So we can move on from that if we want, though. But and I didn't mention before when I introduced Elgie, he was the chairman. I don't know if you still are of that committee. Elgie, is that okay?
Yes.
Well, I'll just comment that your comment about inside income, inside information, I'm not sure it's actually illegal in U.S. law right now, and we know that that in that Senate race in Georgia, David Perdue was his name David Perdue, was really accused of using inside information to benefit himself. It's been a long-standing problem in Congress, and so I hope that they fix their laws. I will say this, and I have to say this. I'm not really sure I agree about statewide laws. Now, maybe there is something to be said for it, but I know that the bill that failed in Springfield recently would have preempted our lobbying laws. And I certainly didn't like that idea. And I hope instead that it goes the other way, because, we, as David just said, the city has lost a lot of money. Its taxpayers lost a lot of money because the top 10 buildings in Chicago, the largest buildings in Chicago, didn't pay their fair share of property taxes. And that really affected the voters. And so I want to be able to protect the city's fiduciary position by not letting that happen. I look forward to working with people in Springfield, and there should be a statewide ethics code. And we certainly don't want to confuse people. But I don't know about preemption. You know, Chicago is its own, you know, it's responsible for so much of its own budget. And so I look forward to talking further about that. That's all.
You know, and David, I often say I'm still trying to find the part-time part of this job, because it's certainly not something that that you can if you do these jobs right, which I find that a lot of my colleagues do, that you are certainly not putting in part-time hours. But now, having said that, that goes back to the discussion I was having earlier about the statements of economic interest. What the general public absolutely abhors is this belief that there is self-dealing happening. And that's why when we have to have the statement, our statement of economic interest, which I've sponsored this legislation for several times now, where we expand because right now, if the statement of economic interest can simply not just say I'm employed here, I'm employed there, I've got investments in this much. That does not give us the ability to understand what drives a person, what drives a person to make decisions if they are self-dealing. You have to have additional information about what decisions is a person making. You know, how are those decisions then determining, is there a connection between the legislative action that an individual takes and their outside fiduciary achievements? So what we've got to understand, and what the general public is calling for, is the ability for us to understand that decisions aren't being made in individuals' own self-interest. I would also talk about the fact that a number of laws are on the books too, currently. So a number of the instances that we have seen where the individuals, for instance, former Representative Luis Arroyo, the activities that he engaged in, those were already illegal. You know, soliciting a bribe, that's illegal. Former Senator Martin Sandoval, some of the activities that he engaged in, they're already illegal. As I talk to constituents of mine and others, what constituents are looking for is the ability to understand that that individuals are doing what is in their best interest and not their own self-interest. And that's what the public wants to know. And that's what they're looking for from all of us.
Can I just say how much I support what Senator Sims is saying? Because I think, first of all, the idea of citizen legislators has been embedded in our American way of life for a very long time. And it's kind of like, if you say that people can't have other income, what that says is you have to be very wealthy, in which case you've got dividend income. Mm-hmm. You have to be very wealthy, or you have to be such a career politician that you have to do whatever you can to hang on to that job. And I think it's great if we have artists and farmers and druggists and restaurant owners and things like that who have an income that gives them, experience to bring to their legislating, and also says to them that they are not so solely dependent on being in public office that they, will do anything to keep their jobs. So that may not agree with what some people feel, but I think that there are consequences to saying that every legislator can never have outside income, because first of all, it's impossible.
Right.
And, people have investments and things like that. So, but I really support what Senator Sims says about full disclosure of the potential conflicts, the things of your income that could lead you to have a conflict is a really important part of this.
Can I piggyback on one other thing the Alderman said?
Yep.
It also, in addition to bringing those experiences, it's the different perspectives. When you're in a discussion about education reform and you're talking to someone who has been in the classroom, that helps. When you're talking about regulations that are going to impact a small business, and you have someone who's run a small business, that helps. When we start talking about changes in the law and you have attorneys in the room, that helps. Those different agricultural policy, having farmers, having those different perspectives are critical to us having policy that works for everybody. And she is absolutely right. That's the difference of opinions. If we go to a perspective where, and we make the elected office only something that the very wealthy can attain, we will return to a day where our democracy is not one that includes everyone, but it's only reserved for a select few.
Or I didn't plan to get into this, but keep in mind the other side of that coin is, or you have to be able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, about millions of dollars in order to stay in office. And that creates many of the problems that we've had in Illinois. But let me kind of push back now a little bit on a question from Nancy S. No, but the way she put it was, why have ethics laws been, quote, ineffectual? But she's kind of getting at how much wiggle room there is. Let's talk a little bit more about the SEI and some of the things that have happened. No offense, but picking on Commissioner Moody. So people understand, the SEI, Statement of Economic Interest, and certain places like Chicago and Cook, they have laws to try and get at the conflict of interest. Okay. Now, I don't know if Mr. Moody, who was getting a great amount of money from Commonwealth Edison, allegedly, quote, for little work, whether that was ever disclosed in his SEI. Okay. So one of the key things I think we could all agree upon is the SEI and many of these forms are way too weak. You could drive a truck through them, which is what Nancy's getting at. So part of that challenge is, how do we make it tougher? If our laws,
David.
Oh, you're back, Larry. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
David, what we've got to do is figure out how we're enforcing the laws we have.
Good.
And, we've got to have stronger IG participation. In our case, the state's attorney has to be able to enforce these, as well as the Board of Ethics, and doing it in an independent way. I think that part of the problem with ethics laws as they develop in the various governments is the enforcement mechanism was always weak, and it wasn't there to hammer people when they violated. And I think that that's the one area where we've got to get more enforcement and make sure that inspector generals aren't hampered, make sure state's attorneys are looking at this, and make sure the Board of Ethics has the power to impose significant fines. They're not going to put people in jail, Board of Ethics, but they can hurt somebody financially, which should stop other people.
And do you believe, because that's a very good point, again, for those who don't follow this every day, so we have our boards of ethics, okay, but we also, in many cases, have IGs, okay, and the Board of Ethics has certain authority to do certain things. And remember, it's not just geared at bad politicians, it's geared toward employee behavior. And in fact, it's also geared toward efficiency. So maybe we can talk about that later. But don't we both, particularly in Chicago and Cook, have pretty good IGs, inspector generals, who are generally on the case? I know Michele might want to comment, though. In the city, remember, that's one of the things that I believe Lori and you all did, is to allow, which it hadn't happened before. Maybe I'm blaming too much on Ed Burke, but the city council was able to stop Inspector General from investigating aldermen as well the way they should have been.
Yeah. I mean, let me say this. I first became alderman in 2011, and at that time, there was an Inspector General that had only started in 2007, David Hoffman, if you remember him, and the aldermen decided to create their own Inspector General, and I voted against it because I knew it was a joke. And it was a joke. And no good came of it, and the guy was nuts. But be that as it may, eventually, after 9 years, I mean, it takes a long time to get stuff passed, because, you know, it's a process. You got to convince a lot of people. And sometimes it takes a scandal. So we finally passed it. And it has been really great. I mean, quite honestly, one thing that the Inspector General has taken on is helping aldermen to do their job. Now, that is not what you would think the Inspector General is doing, but a lot of the things that trip up a new alderman have nothing to do with crime and have to do with just not knowing how to do things. And if we can be more effective, we're all better. And the other thing that we don't have, that the state does have, is financial transparency. You know, the state, and Elgie, you can explain it better, but you guys can actually, when you have a revenue bill or an expense bill, you actually have a body that does a review of it and talks about its impact. We just barely have one. We only got that put in 2016, and it is still not strong enough. So, you know, that's a really important thing too. It's not just personal ethics, but it's understanding the impact on the taxpayers of the bills that are coming before us. And so that's something that Springfield has had for a long time, and it's been a tremendous benefit. But yes, Inspector Generals, I think, should cover.
Okay. Let me get back to Larry, because we lost him for a while. And did you want to follow up on some more of that, Larry? You were talking about the need for certain kinds of enforcement. You mentioned Inspector General, Boards of Ethics. I didn't want to cut you off. Do you have other things you want to?
Well, no, see, I think that, David, it was just on the issue of revenue notes on all of our ordinances, we've required that. We've done that for the last 6 years, and it helps us understand where we're spending, and it also lets us know who has an interest in that spending.
Can you clarify that? What do you mean, revenue notes?
So if we have an ordinance that is put in, we have to have a note that comes from our finance people as to what it's going to cost the county to implement the ordinance that we're talking about. Or if we have a contract, what the contract's costs will be to the county versus what we believe the good that will benefit the county. And that's similar to what happens in Springfield, where the Senate and the House will get fiscal notes from the various agencies on their bills. But I think that, you know, I agree with the Alderman that the IGs we've had have been great, but they haven't had the authority to really enforce their own findings. I mean, even now under our county one, Pat Blanchard files a quarterly report and he suggests solutions, but they can be rejected. And then he can refer cases to the U.S. attorney or to the state's attorney. But I think we need to be figuring out more how to get a hammer. You just talked about somebody who's maybe their statement of economic interest was incomplete. Maybe they also didn't file for secondary employment because it appears in the situation you were talking about that the individual was working a second job since he was being paid by Commonwealth Edison, but we can't find any record of that. Well, it's really kind of impossible to enforce those and to have any meat on the bone when we enforce it. So I really believe we need to come up with stronger standards. And I think that when Elgie's commission was meeting, that they had a number of areas where they were going to make either misdemeanors or felonies for certain misrepresentations that right now maybe go through the cracks.
Okay, so it sounds like one thing we can all agree upon is certainly strengthening enforcement, whether through giving more power, or maybe that's something the county could do to inspector generals. We also pretty much agree across the board. When you have forms to try and have employees and elected officials disclose potential conflicts of interest, that those forms need to be, as Elgie was saying, as clear as possible. I know we've been trying to change one in Springfield for years, so that clearly is something we can agree upon. Let me just jump to some of the other questions. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. Marie had asked, I'm going back to Elgie on this one. We kind of covered it, but what was the question here? Basically, will the Joint Commission produce a report based on the work from 2020, or will they just pass the legislation?
Well, that is certainly the intent. I was as frustrated as anyone about not being able to produce that report. None of us saw COVID coming. When the last meeting that we had of that commission in person, I never would have imagined that was the last time that commission would have convened. And when we came back together, it was trying to get a budget passed for the state of Illinois, passing all of the essential COVID-19 relief packages that we had to get done. So it was none of us saw this thing happening the way it did. Certainly, we want to get to ethics reform package, get in the ethics reform package that's meaningful, that is comprehensive, that's one that does not simply nibble around the edges, but also addresses the fundamental concerns that the constituents have, and that's making sure that they understand that they have the information. No different than what we were just talking about the in Springfield, our fiscal impact note, or our debt impact note, or our correctional impact note. Having data versus anecdote. We want to be able to make sure that we are bringing in and establishing best practices, looking at what's happening around the country, from everything from conflicts of interest to disclosure of those conflicts, what all those things look like. So, what we certainly we want to get the report done. We're working towards that, but more importantly, I want to get significant legislation passed that will make a marked difference in the trust that constituents have in their government. So that's the most important item for us right now.
Okay. Again, a question from John. Do current ethics laws also apply to state political party committee structure? I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, that would only be if those individuals were elected officials or employees of government.
In terms of the ethics ordinances, right. Absolutely. But remember, we do have an election code that puts limitations on how political action committees can spend money, and we do have a state board of elections which can enforce those laws and fines people significantly for violations of them. So I don't want people to think that the state parties can have this money and just move it around without there having somebody watching it. It's just not through the ethics process.
Yeah, and that reminds me, because ethics gets into campaign finance and other things, the city and county do have laws that limit how much a political candidate or elected official can get from vendors who do business with that unit. The state, to the best of my knowledge, LG doesn't. I remember when people would be, let's say, county board president, want to run for governor, they felt, hey, I got one hand tied behind my back because I can only take $750 or $1,500 from a major vendor, whereas someone running against me for governor can take unlimited funds. Is that something that Springfield would consider, that that elected officials could not have a certain threshold? Cities, I believe, 1,500. The county now, thanks to Larry, is down to 750. Is that something that the city would say? I mean, the state would say, elected officials can only take a certain amount from those businesses that do business with the state government?
Well, there are certainly limits in place right now for limits to campaign contributions right now, and that's why I say that having discussion about what our overall changes might be, those are certainly something that I would say everybody's open to listening to and open to thinking about. That's why this process is so helpful. Having these discussions about recommendations and having these discussions about how we're going to move forward. I think this is critical to putting policies in place that benefit the process. And that's what these discussions are all about, making sure that we have a process that the general public believes in. So I would say that nothing's off the table.
Elgie, do you think that your commission will be reconstituted in the 102nd General Assembly, since it was a commission of the 101st?
We've discussed it here in the Senate. We committed, as opposed to doing a standing commission, we created a standing committee. So we have a permanent committee on ethics that I'm going to serve on in the Illinois Senate. I don't know if the House is going to follow suit. They've not finalized their rules yet. I know that's an issue that they're talking about. But I know from our perspective, we will continue those discussions in that standing committee on ethics in the Senate.
I know there's lots to talk about. Let me just throw this out quickly because one of our friends, Dan, has asked about this, and he knows it's a little aside, but he's asking about ranked choice voting and the connections. His connection would be, well, maybe if they had more diversity in candidates, there might be more engagement with voters. But just very quickly, does anybody know that there's a strong push for ranked choice voting? I guess this would be in Springfield, although the laws would have to come out of Springfield, although local jurisdictions would have strong opinions on it. Mm-hmm. If you heard anything about Elgie, I know it's a little beyond the purview, but
no. Yeah, no, I've not heard anything on any proposals dealing with ranked choice voting. You know, I would go back to the cut down amendment, the constitutional amendment that cut the size of the legislature several years back as one of the areas that we've talked about in terms that has shown a change in how government how representation took place. And for those who don't know, the cut down amendment said basically you cut the size of the legislature by a third. There used to be a requirement that each district had members of each political party in it. So there could be 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. But there had to be different parties represented by each district, and there was some value to that. Mm-hmm. There was different perspectives that were involved, and different individuals who had a seat at the table. Now we don't have that. We don't have that ability. But it's still incumbent, and again, this is, to me, and this goes back to the discussion I keep having about the value and the efficacy of our politics. Our politics have become so polarized because people have become cynical about our politics. And when we I recount the story that my district, as David mentioned in my introduction, my district starts on the south side of the city of Chicago, goes down into the southern suburbs, and then extends south into rural Will and Kankakee County. I was in the southern part of my district once, and I was participating in a parade, and I was going along shaking hands, and I get to a woman, and she looks at me, serious as could be, and she looks in my face and says, "We're not used to your kind down here." This was not 1960. This was 2016. And at the time I looked at her, I literally thought she was joking. But she was not joking, and it is a byproduct of the polarization of our politics, and we've not fully addressed and dealt with the schisms which exist between us, and there's still these extreme divisions, and some of that has been driven by the problems that we're talking about here today, and that's why I think it's important for us to have these real discussions. We may disagree. It's okay if we disagree, but just because we disagree doesn't mean that I believe you're dirty. Doesn't I believe you're a thief. Doesn't mean I believe that you're a godless, soulless individual. It just means we have a difference of opinion. But so many times that's the way the perspective comes across. That not only I disagree with you, I disagree with you, and you're a bad person, and you're a crook.
Yeah.
And David, one of the things I don't think we're going to get to ranking in voting because we're still fighting the battles for mail-in ballots. You know, if you look at what the General Assembly passed when they were down there a week ago, it was kind of extending what they had done for the November election. But we're so caught up in that process of trying to get more people to vote, figuring out what's on the ballot hasn't had a chance to have a discussion.
Fair enough. And there's just, by the way, one of the questions that Elgie kind of referred to it, again, it's important, but it's a little aside. It was from Cecilia T about, besides ethics, how can we ensure racism is not neglecting our community, et cetera. And you mentioned a couple of things and also some of the things that all of you have been involved in, minority contracting, for example. What you guys recently did, what the city's done, what the county's done, as they increase the amount of, because remember, governments spend hundreds of millions of dollars, right? State, local, hundreds of millions of dollars buying products from vendors. And so the push from Harold Washington on up to today is how do we make sure that a certain number of those vendors have minority partners? So some of that value money as far as going elsewhere. So
can I just chime in on this, which is I'm a big fan of ranked voting, at least in Chicago, because we have runoffs. And it certainly would save a lot of money to have ranked voting to avoid runoffs. But I also have to go back to the very beginning. And of course, David's intimately familiar with this, that up until Harold Washington, or after he passed away, there was partisan voting in Chicago. And people say to me, oh, isn't it great that Chicago has nonpartisan elections? I said, no, not really, because that law was passed after Harold Washington died in order to try to prevent an African-American mayor from ever being mayor again. Now, time has proven that to be a bad strategy too. But the truth is that the reason that we have nonpartisan elections was to prevent the rise of the so-called Harold Washington Party. So it's a despicable arrangement, a founding. And the same thing is true of our series of having to win by 50 plus one vote. Now, I suppose there's arguments to be made on the other side, that if you have ranked voting, one ranked voting from a nationwide sort of thing, is that you actually might have a chance of having more middle of the road candidates. If enough people, right? If the Ralph Nader voters had been able to say, well, I'll take, Al Gore's my second choice, the plot of American history might have been significantly different. So I certainly support it. It's a whole nother conversation. It's tied up also with redistricting, which we could have a whole nother panel on. But for our purposes, I think giving people that opportunity is an ethical and moral thing to do.
Okay, and there's a lot of proponents, by the way, across the state looking at that. So because we're getting close to the time here, let me throw out to all three of you. Just we can't cover all this; it's exceedingly complicated. Tell us, kind of in summary, for each of you, what do you think are the main things? Again, we could do, even if we're repeating ourselves a little bit, the main things that we can do, and how people can be helpful in that effort, so we make sure that the Commonwealth Edisons don't keep happening. We can't stop criminal behavior, but what can we do about the culture or the sense of trust that Elgie talks about? What can we do to make things better? In any order. Closing arguments.
I think that we've taken some very significant first steps in Chicago. I will say that one of the things that I think corruption always requires a couple people at least, the corruptor and the corruptee. Certain things that aldermen have done in the past couldn't have happened if they didn't have a willing insider in City Hall to assist them. And I think it's really important that we give to our inspector generals anything that we can to give them, the power to do their jobs. I don't know what else other than to say that people have to become, it also would help a lot for people to become as educated voters as they possibly can on the issues of potential conflicts of interest. And I think the things that Senator Sims said would be very helpful in that regard. You know, we've somewhat increased the quality of our judges because now we really do care about bar ratings. And I think that we can increase the quality of our elected officials by really caring about what their ethical stances are.
And David, I think we've got to really enforce the revolving door policy. If you look at the Edison situation, there is more than a handful of former legislators who somehow ended up on the payroll, either as employees of Edison or as consultants to Edison. And we've got to make sure that that can't happen, that there is a period in which you have to be gone from government if before you could come back and do things. And I think that we still don't have that down.
Good. Okay. Revolving door is important.
You know,
Right.
I think that transparency is key. You know, I have faith, and I say this to my constituents all the time. I have faith in them and their ability to move past the sensational to look at the substantive. And you know, there's an element to knee-jerk reactions that you know, if we can have conversations about the reality of a situation, that we can get to a reasonable discussion. I will talk about the cynicism that so many of us have come to see, because we believe that every action is somehow critical. There's some nefarious behavior and intent behind every action, and that's not always the case. Now, again, are there bad actors? Absolutely, but they're bad actors in every industry and in every situation. But transparency is key. When individuals can trust that decisions are being made in the general public's best interest, they will trust their government. And that's really what our constituents are looking for. They're looking for trust. They want to know that things are happening in their best interest, and that's the key. That's the key. You know, when individuals trust their government, they believe in it. And you know, there is. Now I'm going to go back to criminal justice for a minute. Sir Robert Peel, who's the father of modern day policing, talks about the fact that the public will believe in the officer's ability to police them when they believe in the justification that the officer exists. Now, if the officer is doing the right things, basically it means that when the officer is doing the right things, they believe in that the officer has the ability to enforce the law. That's really what the public is looking for. They want to know that the decisions that we're making are just. The decisions that we are making are in their best interest, and they'll trust and believe in us when they believe that.
Well, okay, and let's give the kind of final word there from Elgie, because in other words, transparency means as much public information as possible, disclosure. Okay, so we think of campaign finance, we think of anything we can do, and conflicts of interest, everything where at least outside income, everything we can think of where there's as much information is shared, because not everything's a conflict of interest, but the more the public can judge to say whether or not they believe the individual is following an ethical standard, et cetera. So let me leave it there. I want to thank Elgie, thank you, Michele, Larry, all of you. I'm glad we didn't lose you for too long, Larry. You're all talented, hardworking folks, and we wish you the best. I do want to mention just briefly that the week of either the 16th or 18th, we're going to go federal, and Congressman Jan Schakowsky will be on talking about where we are, since we're all dying to find out what's happening with all these pressing federal issues. How much money we're going to get, how's the Senate going to actually work out, what's going to happen with impeachment. So we'll have Jan on board then. If you haven't signed up, make sure you're on the list someplace so we can let you know about it. And then Maggie, is there any closing comments?
Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, who our special guests, Alderman Michele Smith, Cook County Commissioner Larry Suffredin, and State Senator Elgie Sims Jr. Y'all are great. This is such a great conversation. Also, like David said, Jan Chakowski is going to join us in mid-February. But if you want to help us produce more events like this, you can contribute to Good Government Illinois. We are a PAC. You can go to goodgovernmentillinois.com/donate. So we will see you in mid-February. Be sure to be signed up on our email lists and be in touch anytime at team@goodgovernmentillinois.com. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Go get them.